Everyone, welcome back to Manufacturing Hub. We are on episode 161 with Aaron Prather. I have got his name correct, as I was telling him when we had him on episode 45, like a year and a half ago. I am unsure if I got his name correct. So we 100% will get Aaron's name correct today. If you guys are new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. This month, the month of April, we're talking all about robotics. I'm super excited to have Aaron come on and share his story from kind of the continuation of episode 45. Episode 45, for all of our not long-term listeners, Aaron was deep in the deep deploying next generation solutions for FedEx, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what he has done from that point. I will say, if you guys are interested in robotics, absolutely, there's a ton of things to go ahead and check out. If you're watching live, let me go ahead and give you the short rundown. So today, if you're watching live, is April 10th. In a week and a half, Hanover Messe is happening over in Germany. The following week, on May 1st and 2nd, we've got the Robotics Summit and Expo in Boston, and Aaron was saying that he's going to be there. They've got, well, if you guys are standards fans, I think there'll be a lot of fun things for you guys to go ahead and explore. And then the following week is Automate in Chicago, which if anyone does the triple, it will probably be the most robots anyone's going to see over the course of 3 weeks, all year long, wall to wall to wall robotics. But no, if you guys are new here, again, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you're new here, we love to have a very kind of active chat. So feel free, especially if you're on LinkedIn or YouTube, to go ahead and drop comments, drop questions for Aaron, drop questions for us. If you want to know where we'll be or what we're doing during all of those, please feel free to go ahead and drop comments. As we've got questions coming in, we will certainly do our very best to go ahead and ask Aaron and or go ahead and fill in. But without further ado, everyone officially welcome to episode 161. Aaron, welcome back to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dave and Vlad, for having me. Glad to come back.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time once again, Aaron. If we want to, I guess, start before we get into robotics, I know we have a lot to discuss on our plate. I do want to get your background a little bit once again. Dave has mentioned that you've made a transition. So could you also maybe elaborate on what it is that you are doing today?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the last time I was with you guys, we did the show from my lab at FedEx. A lot of folks remember that one because I think, one of your first guests that actually had robots moving in the background. Mm-hmm. Sadly, I'm now in a hotel in Philadelphia, so sorry, not a sexy background. But I worked for FedEx for over 27 years. I actually started there on the weekends, offloading trucks while I was still a university student. And I just slowly worked my way up the technology ramp there. I worked on pretty much every piece of technology FedEx touched on. And my final role was I was the senior advisor for the R&D team, where we tested out new products. We created some own products. We created our own patents. We ran robots day, night, left, right, every which way. And it was a fun job. I mean, there are days I miss being in my lab. I miss my robots, but the opportunity came along here at ASTM International, which is one of the oldest standards organizations in the world. And they really wanted to build out their robotics and autonomous systems programs. And so I sort of looked at I've been doing this job for a quarter of a decade. I've been helping one company in one sector advance robotics, and it's been fun. But here's an opportunity for me to work with anybody and everybody that wants to work on robots across the globe, regardless of industry, regardless of country. And it's like, wow, this is an opportunity for me really to go out there and advance robotics through numerous avenues. I mean, it's not just standards we work on. We do advisory services, we do training, we do tons of other activities. And we just keep building. And that's one of the reasons I'm here in Philadelphia is this is our committee week, where F45, which is the ASTM committee group over robotics, is having in-person meetings. And we're going to make some announcements actually at the upcoming summit of new initiatives that we will launch here at ASTM in robotics in various sectors. So more to come on that. We just got the first approvals done today. We will get the final approvals in the coming days so we can present those at the summit. But great work. I mean, it's been a fun new transition. I'm traveling left and right. I just came back from the UK. I'm going to Korea next week. So actually, if you want to really challenge, not only do the three-peat of Messi, the summits, and then automate, there's going to be Ikara in Japan the week after, and some of us are going to that too, Dave. So if you really want to do the full gamut of Germany, Boston, Chicago, Yokohama.
What's the trade show? Sorry, Aaron.
You're going in the right direction.
Yeah. It's Ikara. It's IEEE's biggest robotic event of the year. About 10,000 robotic researchers and industrial folks. This is where you see the robots that are still in the lab that are coming to market.
Interesting.
And it is drinking from the fire hose. Just like Automate is everything that is available to you that is on the market and ready to go into your warehouse, factory, or whatever. Ikara is where the stuff that's coming up through the pipeline is going to be shown. So it's going to be crazy, to say the least. It's going to be robots galore for the next 4 weeks.
I believe I found the right link, so I posted it onto LinkedIn in case anybody is curious. It is in mid-May in Japan, as you can see here.
Yep.
IEEE International Conference on Robotics and Automation in Pacifico, Yokohama. Very interesting. Yep. Aaron, I have a ton of questions on the standard side. As we discussed, I think it's very important for the industry and us as, I guess, the experts discussing the topic to have the same definition when it comes to robotics, right? And as I've alluded to, I think as an engineer, as I guess someone who's been in manufacturing, you can say that many things are, let's call it robotics, that are mechanical, electrical, or a combination of thereof. So I'd want maybe you to give us what is the official or the most accepted, I don't know if there's an official body that has defined robotics. Yeah. And then kind of the buckets as well, right? Because there's robotic arms, there's humanoid robots, there's AMRs, right? So can you give us a description, I guess, of those big items?
Yeah, I mean, robotics, the term keeps getting changed, okay? I mean, if you looked at the term 10 years ago, you had to have a certain number of axes to be a robot because all we could think of was robotic arms. So, okay, you have to have certain, well, what's a mobile robot then? Is that, so the whole thing is yes, the term robot keeps changing. And I will say in the standards world, your most powerful group within your standards organization is your vocab list and the team that maintains your vocab. Actually, today, we actually put 2 vocab teams together, one that represented the robotics and autonomous systems groups, the other one that represents the exoskeleton world, because those exos are becoming robotic and people are wearing robots. So those 2 worlds are starting to come together. So they have their own standards, but it's also now, how do they make their vocab match so that somebody that's talking from the robotic side about maybe a wearable robot they want to build, the exo world understands what that is because they use the same vocab. So the first thing that we have to always talk about when it comes to standards world is, what is your vocab? What is your definitions? Those are hard to maintain. And at ASTM, when we're dealing with 110 different industries and we have over 13,000 published standards, making words match is a big undertaking. So I will say that amongst us standards development groups, organizations, SDOs, standards development organizations, so I'm going to use that term probably a lot today. SDOs like ASTM, ISO, ANSI, A3, UL, list goes on and on. We try and make sure our vocab lists are consistent. So you'll sometimes see, if you're reading an ASTM vocab list, it might say reference IEC this number, because that's literally us telling you, the reader, ASTM is accepted an IEC definition of a word, and that's the word we're going to go with. And you'll see the same thing with them. They'll might say, for this word, reference ASTM F3200, which was one of our vocab lists. And that's just them saying, we're not going to even try and recreate this word in our documents. We're just going to use what ASTM's defined it as. But that is the biggest time thing in standards, is just getting the words right. And you got to have some real patience sometimes, because you'll be arguing over the word "the" for weeks. I've always said the unsung heroes of the robotics industry are all our English majors that have come to the industry, because they help us do this stuff. They really do.
It's and I guess so for robotics, going back to like that definition, is there a consensus among the organization? Does everyone have their own, and then someone refers to, as you said, like vice versa could happen, but is there an accepted like definition? I think for me the most curious would be industrial robotics, right? And at that point it's again like cobots, arms, and deltas. I think those are kind of the ones that I see the most, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for industrial robots, it is pretty agreed to of what an industrial robot is, especially like a Delta robot or a SCARA robot. Very easy. Everyone knows what that is. Now, the issue, and Vlad, you brought up the perfect term there, industrial. That is starting to get really gray really fast, because we're starting to see arms not in industrial settings anymore. We've all seen the videos from Japan and Korea and China of collaborative robots from UR or other companies serving ice cream or handing something to somebody. That's not an industrial use, but we all sort of agree that that's an industrial robot. So this is where we're starting to gray. And this is why standards are always trying to keep up with how do you define that. The good thing is I would say if your robot arm, regardless if it's a SCARA, a Delta, or a 6-axis, if it's following like ISO 10218 Part 1 for manufacturers, that is a safe robot, and I would trust that robot in almost any setting. If it was built to that standard, it has features of safety we should all be comfortable with.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. And I guess let me ask you one last question before I pass over the mic to Dave. Is how do you keep up with, I guess, these use cases that are more, I want to say, like edge than anything else? I'm assuming it's not mass market yet, when companies are trying to use robots to manipulate, let's say, things outside of the industrial space, because ultimately I would assume you would want to be as proactive as possible, but I think it's almost impossible, right? So you need to sort of react with what the industry is doing, and then sort of try and I want to say like readapt the standards, so to speak. So what does that process look like?
Yeah, I mean, the standards world is very reactive. It's hard to be proactive when your technology is changing so rapidly. The best thing we can do is we try and engage those manufacturers, those integrators that are starting to build outside of the set standard. And that's not to say that that's not a bad thing. Actually, that's how we innovate. And standards have those built-in processes to adapt. Case in point, an ASTM standard is only good for 5 years on paper. Within the 5 years, it has to enter the review process between year 5 and 7. It has to go into review. If everything's good, everything works fine, everyone can just vote on it and say it's still good. It gets its new life. Okay, it gets put back out there. If there's the need for a change, that's when you change things. That's when you update the standard to whatever the new technology is, or the new research that has come out that is backing those findings. If you don't do that by year 7, the standard dies. It is ended. It's gone. It's no longer valid. Now, we don't destroy it. It's left out on the books but it is noted as this is no longer a valid standard because it was never updated. So that means it could be updated down the road if someone wants to, but that's at least how ASTM deals with it, is after 7 years, if it's not updated or not voted on again, it becomes a dead standard. COs have their own processes in that.
Dave, thoughts?
Interesting. I think that is very interesting. I like the fact that there's the built-in review process. And Aaron, I guess before we go jump and dig into standards a little bit more, I do want to shout out Tomas in the comments in chat saying he's an English and philosophy grad here, and I think he is doing the hardest work just knowing how almost every single engineer I've ever met just uses and or butchers the English language, if we even want to begin calling what many of us communicate in English. But Aaron, before we go and kind of dive more into the standards, I want to make sure that we talk maybe about some basic things for groups looking to get started. And I feel like before we go dig into the details, if there's groups who are looking to get started on the robotics side, what standards should they look at, and maybe how should they use those standards to help them dive into the world of robotics?
Yeah, if you're brand new to the world of robotics, I'm going to just say that there's 3 standards you need to make yourself aware of as a beginner. The first one is ISO 10218. That is the mother of all robot safety standards. It is what the whole world literally looks to. There is a part 1 that is for the manufacturer of the robot, and part 2 is for the integrator. And it's very critical that if you are brand new to standards, you know ISO 10218 in one way or another. I will tell you right now, 10218 is going through a massive update right now. It is getting the last time it was updated was about 12 years ago. I mean, but the issue was in the past 12 years, a lot of stuff has happened. Okay, ISO does a great job of trying to keep up with this, but when it does come to robot safety, that it is so important, you got to get a lot of agreements. Okay, you got to get a lot of countries on board, making sure everyone's going to do the updates. The one thing also with 10218 is it's going to grow. This update's going to make it a big standard. It's going to almost add 200 pages. But here's the thing, guys. Those 200 pages have already been written over the 12 years. They address things like collaborative robot applications, end user safety responsibilities, those kind of things. All that is getting finally put into the documents. They were written to supplement the document over the 12 years, but they're now updating. So that's the first document. Here in the U.S. and North America, you need to know ANSI A3's 2 standards, R15.06, which is the U.S. equivalent to ISO 10218. They're pretty much the same documents. They're just the metrics taken out, the feeder put in, those kind of things. And then the other one is R15.08, which is mobile industrial robots. So those here in the United States, for the vast majority of your listeners here in the United States, those are the 3 standards you need to know. No ISO 10218. No R15.06, which is pretty much the same one, but it's Americanized. And then the new one is the mobile one, R15.08. And so if you're deploying mobile robots, you need to know that one, plain and simple. Those are going to get you the farthest for your first day. And I will also say the other reason you need to know those are the ones OSHA knows. And so you want to know what OSHA knows, those are what OSHA knows. So those are the 3 standards you need to get yourself up to speed on.
No, I think that's really good. I think Vlad and I are frantically taking notes to make sure that that we know what these standards are. But no, so I think, and so Vlad is dropping those in the comments. And if you guys are listening on podcast form, we will go ahead and have all of those out there. So Aaron, let's say people have these standards. How do they use the standards to craft their robotic strategy Hopefully there is a strategy. So how would
Yeah.
people use them to craft the robotic strategy, or maybe deploy the first couple of robots if we're not quite to strategy level?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing of why you need to know those standards is you need to do a risk assessment. You need to evaluate your application to your facility, to your workers. You have to do a full risk assessment of, okay, the robot's going to be doing this motion. What do I need to make sure none of my employees get hurt while it's doing that motion? Is it a cage? Is it a light curtain? What is it? So the whole thing is that within those standards, you are going to be told over and over again, do your risk assessment. And the other reason why that's very important is when an integrator comes in and builds your system for you, and they do the risk assessment or you do the risk assessment. If anything, you both need to be doing the risk assessment together, ideally. And if they're the ones tasked with writing it all up and printing it off, they're going to hand that to you on the last day, saying, here's your risk assessment. Everything's installed. Everything's working. Have a nice day. Well, if some incident happens a year later and OSHA comes in, guess what's the first thing the OSHA inspector is going to ask for?
Risk
Your
assessment.
risk assessment. So this is why you need to do it. For anything else, your corporate lawyers will tell you, you better have that on file. But also the whole thing is it helps you see what your robot's going to be doing. Is there better ways of doing things? And that's the other thing about a risk assessment. Let's say in a year you change out the end effector because a new design came out and it's going to take your grasping capabilities from 97% to 99%. That could be huge for for industry. Well, guess what? You got to redo your risk assessment. You've just added a new component, and you just go through the steps. You make sure, okay, yeah, I put the new end effector on. I rechecked. Yeah, it's still moving at the same rate. But you also want to just make sure, are you not introducing another risk? And sometimes a lot of folks don't realize what you're moving, what your robot is handling, that's part of the system. So if you're moving panes of glass, you probably want to take that into account in your risk assessment. I'm moving glass, guys. So if the robot drops it, what other risks does that create? So the risk assessment makes you think through all these processes, and it produces great results. Okay. Because we've seen all the horror stories of people not doing that and bad things happen. And trust me, a lawyer will eat you alive, because the first question they're going to ask also is, so when did you realize that the guarding was 6 inches short? It's like, oh, probably when Tim lost his finger 6 inches down. Okay, well, you probably sort of thought that through ahead of time. And if you had done your risk assessment, you would have realized you needed 6 more inches of guarding.
Absolutely. Let me ask one more question, because I know Vlad's got like 20 questions. So let me ask one question, because I want to specifically. Before I do so, guys, we got like 4 dozen folks in the chat watching us live. If you guys have questions or comments for Aaron, please go ahead and throw them in the chat. Again, for all of our new viewers, we generally love to have a lively chat in here. Having said that, Aaron, so in the past, we've done a couple of like safety roundtables, and there's lots of discussion as to the differences of safety standards in the US versus Europe versus other parts of the world. And we had Zach Stank from Phoenix Contact on it, and Zach said this has said one of these things that has really stuck with me, right? Basically, in Europe, if a company were to come in and do a risk assessment and to deploy a machine, they still assume some amount of that risk and responsibility, assuming everything has stayed the same. In the United States, a company can come in and do a risk assessment and deploy a machine, but when they leave and hand the risk assessment over, assumably there's a risk assessment done, the end user becomes nearly 100% responsible for that. So is that the same in robotics?
Yes.
Okay.
And that is just because of how the U.S. framework for regulatory and legal purposes has been set up. The end user is ultimately responsible for their robot. So this is going back to what I said earlier. During the risk assessment process, the integrator and the end user should be working together on that. Because the integrator might not understand all the little minutia around your operations or around your product. They understand the robot. They don't understand Well, what do you mean you got to shut down every 3 hours to do something? Well, that's something you probably need to be in the risk assessment, because during that shutdown period, what's the robot supposed to do? So the end user and the integrator should be working together on the risk assessment, so they're not that all blind spots are covered. Because the end robot's about to do, the integrator will say, okay, during this move, there's an issue, going to be other risks. Okay. If the end user understands that, then they can say, okay, well, then this is how we would probably address that. So again, it has to be a team play. But yes, in some countries, the integrator who made the robot system, they're going to be held liable for any issues. Here in the US, nope. OSHA can only go after the end user. So that's the other thing of, I've seen end users like, well, I didn't know it wasn't safe. OSHA don't care. You should have known. And when actually you read the standard, it literally says the end user better make sure they have a risk assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what OSHA is going to point right back to. It says right here, dude, you're responsible for this. And so again, you should not know the standards if the OSHA inspectors are going to know the standards. You really want the OSHA inspectors telling you how they do robot safety. I mean, that's when it's going to come down to, guys.
If I can add to that point, Aaron, I think that's why the FATs and VATs are so important, because I find they're usually the last line of defense for the end user to say, hey, this does not meet a certain standard. This should not be, deployed at our facility until XYZ changes are made. And a lot of times, at least from personal experience, I've seen that sort of being glanced over. And as you mentioned, that typically leads to unfortunate, let's call it fines or worse in the years to come.
Yeah, I mean, the team at A3 did a really good technical report a couple years ago that I actually got to contribute a couple lines to. And it literally says, if you're an end user, these are the things you probably should look out for. It was a document written for end users saying, hey, in this standard, it says this. This is what it means. Okay, we're going to even go in more depth past this one page in the standard. We're going to give you 8 more pages explaining why this is important to you. Mm-hmm. So that's another document that's out there. I believe it's 15.906. It's a little late in the day, but A3's end user spec list.
Good. We will not hold you accountable for the exact nomenclature today, but we will do our best to find them and sort of add them in the description for someone who wants to follow up or maybe read them after they're driving or whatnot. But Aaron, I wanted to ask you again, and maybe take us a step back, right? For someone, I've personally not read the robotics standard. I've read a lot of the sort of control systems and ISA standards on that side. So I understand in a pretty good, I guess, way how detailed they can be. And you've given us a couple of examples, right? Like the fence could be short or too long, but how prescriptive would you say they are for someone who has not read through them and is perhaps like an end user? To what detail, do they usually go? Is it, the speed of the robot? Is it the payloads? Do they describe very specific, like gripper examples? Like what's in such a standard?
I mean, they don't go super in depth. There are certain areas that they definitely say, yes, you must do this. Case in point, fencing. Fencing is very specific on how high it should be in relationship to the rest of the application. There are some new updates that are coming in this new 10.2.18, which I'm very happy to see are going through. And it's to clear up some confusion on fencing. Like one of the cases in the fencing is how, if you have those crossbone fence designs, zigzag designs, how small should those openings be? Or what's the maximum they should be? There was a little bit of a disconnect over the past 12 years where ISO was saying that they should be very small. The US said that they could be bigger. The US has given up on that position. They're going more to the ISO position. And the reason why is women. When you looked at the old fencing, us men would have a problem getting our fingers in there.
Okay.
Women, 5 foot tall women, could get their fingers in there. That's a safety hazard now. So the whole thing is they're very much saying we got to close the fence down because so women can't get their fingers in there just because they're just smaller in nature. Same thing with how high off the ground the fence should be. That's getting shrunk so people can't get their feet underneath them. So in those areas, they are very specific of like, you will only have this much latitude. In other areas, they're very much like, you should probably do this. You should probably look at this. There's also the caveat of if there is a local or country override, you're responsible for that, not us. So there's most of these standards repeat themselves over as a cite local regulations as well, because there are certain countries in Europe, there are some states here in the United States, there's provinces in Canada where there's rules beyond the standard, and you just need to know those. We can't list them all as a standards organization, but you should know what those are. And if you're working with a great integrator, they know already what those are.
Very interesting. I guess let me ask you a question on that example with the fencing. How do you get the data to make those decisions? Are you receiving? I guess my only assumption is that end users have some kind of incidents, and then say they send in reports either to OSHA or I don't know, maybe to you guys directly, and then you have to go and read through all of them and then conduct some kind of an assessment on your side. What does that maybe process look like?
Yeah, I mean, we do get reports from organizations like OSHA, NIOSH. We also get some great stuff from researchers. There's some great researchers around robot safety in Korea, Germany, here in the United States. Rice University is actually a really good school that's been producing some of this stuff. And they're looking at the same data. They're getting that raw data feed from those agencies, and they start looking at these things. And it was actually Canada that really sort of started uncovering this. Wait a second, women can get their fingers in this thing. We probably should address this, guys. And again, it's just sometimes just, why didn't we think of that kind of stuff? But it's the evolution as new technologies come on board. You have to adapt to those, and they make things better, but sometimes you have to be a little bit conservative too. Some technologies folks can't afford. Okay. The Veo robotics system that detects people, and you can pretty much make an industrial robot collaborative because of their vision system, is great. It is amazing. It is actually certified to some standards that it can do these things. Mom and pop's CNC machine shops are not going to be able to afford that system. So you try and make the standard as broad so you can cover as many technologies as possible, but also you can limit it down so that you can give very specific answers to those mom and pops if they're going to do the baseline fencing. Okay, we can cover fencing all the time. It's when you get into light curtains and those those become a little bit more adjustable. And sometimes you just got to give a little leeway, but you try and be as perspective as possible of saying it should not be moving at this speed if the person's this close to it.
Gotcha. And so again, last question before I pass it on to Dave, because I think it's a very interesting topic, right? Because I think it's, first of all, extremely important to protect the workers in a very how to say, like, systematic way, and I think it's important to have consistency across different facilities. So if I can ask you, maybe as you, how do I want to say it, as you develop the standards, right, and they evolve over time, and these new technologies, again, I think they make it easier on one side, but they make it a bit more complex for maybe like the small players. So how do you make sure that they're like inclusive but at the same time accessible, right? And I think the other question maybe in that same bundle is, who is ultimately enforcing these standards as they are deployed at a site for an end user? I think we've touched a bit about that off stream, but I do want to make sure that the listeners are understanding, how those standards come into the facility, and ultimately like who's there to either educate or maybe at the same time maybe fine in some instances, and how does that process happen?
Yeah, I mean, we probably could talk a long time on this one, to say the least. But the whole thing is standards, as I mentioned earlier, is if in it industries, especially mature industries, sort of understand that they all sort of got to follow the same playbook in certain ways. And that's not to say give up competitive advantages. No, I mean, that's the last thing anyone wants to do. Going back to the original thing, we should be talking the same language. We should be doing the same procedures to get the same outcomes when we have to. Okay. And so that's why almost all of the standards organizations are made up of a mixture of people that represent industry, academia, government, you name it. And the more diverse of group is ideal. So I know with F45, we try and make sure we're very balanced between academia, industry, integrators, government researchers, whoever. We try and keep a very balanced. And the other SDOs do a good job of that. Now, on the enforcement part, most of the robotic manufacturers, the FedEx, the Yaskawas, the ABBs, they all participate on these standards groups as well. I have been in so many rooms where literally Yaskawa and FANUC and ABB are all sitting together. They're all buddy, but they're making sure that the standards, they can all comply to it. And sometimes there's been disagreements amongst them because of a competitive advantage or whatever, but those get ironed out. But they build to their standards. And this is another thing I would say to any newbie that's trying to build a robot. Go look at the standards. Go look at what you're going to be probably held accountable to. Now, so there's a lot of self-policing. That's the other area. You can certify your robot to a standard. You can either do that through self-certification and say, we self-certified to this, or you can go pay the money and go get a bunch of independent labs to certify your robot to whatever standard you want it certified to. And you can gladly talk to me on that. We'll get you through the process. But at the end of the day, it's mostly, again, retroactive. It's somebody got hurt. And here comes the regulatory agencies. And they're going to be asking the question of, where's your risk assessment? Why this happened? And it's after the fact. And that's sad. Now, OSHA has been trying to be very proactive of telling manufacturers and warehouses of, hey, if you have a question, if you have a concern of you're not following it, we'll come in, promise of no fines, no nothing, but we'll tell you if you're doing it right or wrong. But that's still a hard sell for a lot of folks. Even though OSHA will say, we'll keep the blinders on, we won't fine you because you're trying to be a good corporate citizen and just tell me if I'm working. Now, this is where a lot of us are doing advisory service as well, because maybe they don't want OSHA. So one of us standards group will come in and we'll walk the floor with them and tell them, yeah, you might want to fix that. What's this? Hey, this looks really good. You're doing a good job on this. So it's a mix, but enforcement normally comes after the fact.
Yeah.
And it's by OSHA, right? I think, again, like I want to make that point clear. I think you've described it to me and Dave right before the show, but I think, again, like for the listeners, my understanding is that OSHA will not necessarily know every single detail, as I understood it, of the robotics standard, but they will put to a general clause that encompasses a certain standard and still will be able to reference that, right? So
so case in point, let's say somebody had an incident where they put their finger through the fence, something came down and it took the tip off their finger. That's an OSHA injury. OSHA's going to come in. They're going to ask for the risk assessment and they'll look at it, but they're going to still say, like, how'd they get their finger in there? And it's like, well, because we didn't shrink the gap. And they're like, okay, well, here it is in the standard. So yeah, they cite you on what's called the general duty clause of you have a general duty to keep your folks safe. And then they reference down to the standard and saying, this is the part you probably missed right here. But they'll get you on the general duty clause.
Absolutely, and it's never good when there's an incident and OSHA has to be involved. Everyone always loses,
Mhm.
and typically when OSHA is there, someone has gotten injured pretty badly, and the end user organization is going to feel the pain. Now, Aaron, I've never worked with an organization that is like self-called OSHA and to that service. I've come really close of I've come really close with a number of them who are I go walk the floor and I'm like, I feel very unsafe. We need to take dramatic
Mhm.
changes in the immediacy. I want to go talk about some of those applications, but first, as we kind of alluded to, this is Standards Week as part of all of the robotics things that you're doing. It is exciting for probably like maybe up to like 30 or 40% of our listeners, right? Like if you guys are standards nerds, actually you may actually be with Aaron this week in Philadelphia going and writing this. But if people aren't familiar with this, can you give the listeners and maybe Vlad and I a bit more of an overview as to what's going on this week and the process that you guys take and the different groups that are involved, please?
Yep. Oh yeah. So ASTM committee week is it's not just the robotics guys. There's a bunch of other groups that are meeting this week in standards. As I said, ASTM is 125 years old. We were born out of the railroad industry, so we cover every freaking industry there is. So for the robotics group, what their meeting is, they do 2 in-person meetings every year. This is their spring meetings in Philadelphia. Our fall meetings will be in Orlando. So woohoo! We're all going to Disney World in the fall. But what they're focused on is what's already being worked on, what needs to be in the pipeline, and then also how do they complement the other SDO's work. So let's break those down. So F45 has about 11 published standards right now, mostly all focused on test and performance. As I said, ISO and ANSI and A3 take care of the safety side. We take care of the test and performance side. So we set up all the tests for the robots. We measure, we do the benchmarking. So a lot of that work. But they've also filed until this weekend, which they've already added to this number, and I won't have the official number yet. They already have 12 other work items they're working on in different areas, mostly in 2 of the new focus areas that F45 has taken on this year. And one is grasping and manipulation of how do you actually measure your grasp strength. So I'll take my little glass. So if you have an end effector coming in and grasping this, one of the tests that they're working on is how much force does it take to hold that glass in place without breaking it? I mean, this feeds into your safety standards. You don't want your end effector breaking something because it just can grasp it too hard. The other test that they're working on is now developing a test where the grasper is holding that, but then it's trying to pull it out to find out how much strength it has. Again, this feeds into your safety, but this is where ASTM, we work higher up on the standards chain to do these individual tests. So, and then the other group that's very active right now is our legged robot group. Actually, ASTM is the only group that right now has a legged robot test group, and they're working on disturbance of how much force can a legged robot take and still stay upright, because you don't want to know. I mean, last thing you're going to want is your legged robot falling over on somebody. Yep. So that's what they're working on. And what's really interesting about that is they're using a lot of the Department of Transportation's rollover research for cars of how much force does it make a car roll over. They're actually using some of those very same principles to come up with those. But the process is somebody comes to us, they say, we found a gap in the framework, the standards framework, that no one knows how to test this, or what's the performance of this, or how does this relate to this. They literally pitch the F45 committee saying, this is what we think we want to work on. F45 always goes back and says, okay, what research do you have? What's your backing on this? I mean, are you the only ones working on this, or is other people have identified this problem? And if they show a good enough case that they're not alone in this. Other folks have identified this as an issue. Then the next question is like, okay, are you ready to work on it? Because all standards are volunteer made.
Mm-hmm.
I don't write standards anymore. This is actually one of the things I had to give up joining ASTM because we want the members making the standards, not Aaron. Okay.
Right.
I mean, I will help and support them, but nothing's coming out of my brain. It's coming from the volunteer. This is needed. And then I become their advocate. So that's a little side note on that. But if the committee feels like, okay, this is a work item, they'll go ahead and give a first approval saying we're moving this on up to a final approval vote. And that's what a lot's going on right now, is a lot of pitches did get approved at that first level. They're now going to move up to the next range where they have to be fully approved by the entire committee, not this smaller group that does the first check. Then if that group approves, the work item is filed. And you might see a press release from one of us SDOs saying, new work item filed in this area. And that's just to put the public on notice that ASTM or ISO or ANSI are working on these items. It puts the other SDOs on notice that a fellow SDO has planted their flag saying, hey, we're working on this. But it also then allows me to go recruit the experts in those areas. So if a group says, we have 4 people that want to work on this, and the committee says, no, we're going to give you tentative approval, but you need to have 8 people working on this. Well, guess who's going to go find the other 4? Me. And I'll go find those folks and bring them in so that those 8 now can work on something. So,
interesting.
But then as the standards developed, it's being monitored, it's being checked on by the rest of the committee. When it is to a final ballot stage, it goes to ballot within a smaller part of the organization that just says it's been approved at this level. Then it goes to the bigger committee to be voted on. And if it passes that, it becomes a standard. And now it is a published standard for anyone to use.
And so maybe to continue in that same direction, Aaron, how does it get rolled out, right? So I know, for example, the NEC or the NFPA, so those are National Electrical Code standards. They get rolled out I believe like each state can adopt it every 3 or 4 years. And so obviously you have some time to get in compliance. And I would assume, again, going back to our like fence discussion earlier, it's not the same day that the standard gets released. You need to be following that. And also, I guess, like, is there any what's the seniority clause, right? Where you can essentially not have followed it as long as the machine was deployed at the first standard and followed that, then it's fine. I guess like what happens once the standard gets released into the wild, so to speak?
Exactly how you said, Vlad. It's you can be grandfathered. So if I put out a new standard and you built to the old standard, you are still fine. There is no questions going to be asked. However, going back to what we talked about earlier, you change one component now you got to move to the new standard. So it is the whole thing of, if your system's fine and it's working, it will be governed under the old standard. But the moment you change one component on that thing or update it, you got to move up to the next thing, the new standard.
Gotcha.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Go ahead, Dave.
So I think it's super interesting, Aaron, and I will say, because again, we've got more than 4 dozen folks in the chat and the comments. If you guys have questions or comments for Aaron, every once in a while, LinkedIn doesn't go publish those into our immediate chat, and I can see at least a couple on LinkedIn that have not made it into the chat. But please go ahead and ask and comment and all of those awesome things, especially if you're standards geeks. Again, looking for more of those. I think that this is really interesting for that. So I want to get into a couple of applications, but I have a question for you, Aaron, that I have absolutely not prepared you for. So I'm going to go ask you the question, and there may not be an answer. But so I see a lot of groups dealing with generative AI and using quote unquote AI with their robotics. And if it's AI or not, we shall not debate that because that is a completely different show.
Yep.
Is there an SDO that is working kind of the combination of robotics and maybe multiple end arm effectors plus generative AI plus maybe vision and other things. Is that something that Nestio would work on, or is that a larger, almost maybe too large of a combination of topics?
Yes and yes. So there are SDOs that are working on ASTM. I mean, on AI, and ASTM is one of those. We don't have a full. We're working on this very specific thing. If anything, we're looking very broadly right now. It has been brought up within F-45, especially as these large language models are starting to come into play. There's a lot of questions on, should we look at standardizing training data? Should that be the first thing we sort of look at? And there's been efforts at UL, IEEE, very much in that whole ethical data training aspect. There's been some really good work on that. The folks at NIST, which falls under the Department of Commerce here in the United States, those guys have been looking at various standardization around AI as well. They have the AI Institute now. There was a recent agreement between them and their UK counterparts on how to maybe across the pond come up with some standardization regulation issues. And this is where AI's sort of broken the mold for us standards organizations. Is it's come on so fast, so quickly. None of us SDOs were able to get anything out the door before the regulatory agency started saying, "What you guys got? We need to do something here." And we were all like, "We don't got anything here." So that's why you saw like the EU Act on AI really fast. And was that ideal? No. But AI has grown so fast, it got so far ahead of us SDOs. The regulatory agencies had to do something. And the good news is they are pushing back on us SDOs of, come up with something, guys. We don't want to be doing this. So there is numerous efforts. I can't name an SDO that's not focused on. I think the issue is, where do we start? What is the thing that we can all agree on of, if we standardize this, that gives us a good basis to build out a full framework. Because going back to like our test and performance standards at ASTM, we reference the safety standards because they're so critical. With AI right now, there's nothing really to reference back to yet. There is some good work going on there. The focus is, I would say right now, heavily on the training data side of
Interesting.
making sure your data is ethically collected and used. So, and that in itself is going to be a hard one to put, but it's a start. But it just shows everything we just talked about, guys, is this moves fast. And as standards groups, we try and keep up, but we're only as good as the folks that volunteer their time to actually help us make the standards.
Gotcha. And I think it's a very interesting conversation, if I can jump in, Dave, because it's a really good question. I think AI is being discussed more and more. I think that also as we've discussed on the prep call, I think we as the industry experts need to be careful what kind of information gets disseminated out there. And I think there could be, I don't want to say misconceptions, but I guess misunderstandings based on, I want to say media that portrays some of these perhaps incidents or AI, let's say advancements as we're going towards Skynet and, Judgment Day is coming. And I think it's, at least my opinion is that we're far from that. But like I said, I think it's still important to not stifle the innovation that is happening in this field as a result of, people simply not being sort of educated enough. So I guess to follow up like Dave's question, which I think is very relevant for today, maybe how can we better like disseminate that kind of education, training, awareness? Like Aaron, I know your organization's probably doing a lot of that, but is there anything else that can, should, or is possible to be done?
I mean, I think you really touch on the point of don't panic right now, guys. We're early on here. Yes, there are going to be some edge case weirdo stories out there that are going to pop up. However, it's still very early. If you've used Chat GPT a lot, you start seeing its stupidity coming out. It's not always dead right. It hallucinates. That's another word. I mean, actually, we could define that word in any document as AI hallucinations of where AI thinks it's doing the right thing and it's definitely not. But I would definitely say if you are interested in AI, and regardless of what industry you're in, every industry is trying to solve this. Case in point, ASTM, 110 industries. I would say 108 of them is asking AI questions of how do we address AI within our industry. So this is where AI is going to be very complex. And as I made the argument, robotics is going to touch every industry out there. AI is going to touch every industry plus one. It's just going to happen. So if anything, this is an opportunity. If you have a passion for your industry and you have a passion for AI, there is an SDO that probably wants to talk to you of how should your industry approach AI? And let's make some standards. They don't have to be all encompassing. They could just address small things like just the training data or the application. But we need more people at the table. Okay. I can't write standards for everybody. Okay. I can't. I'm not even allowed to anymore. But this is where we need more folks at the table. Okay. And if you really want to advance your industry, being involved in standardization is a way to advance your industry. It's also a great networking opportunity because you start learning from other folks of how they're approaching these things. So I've always said standards meetings are probably one of the greatest networking events because you're going to run into folks from companies and other industries, especially within robotics and AI, that you'll never run into anywhere else. But they're all trying to save the same issues, and they want a standard to help them get there.
Absolutely. No, I think that is really, really interesting. I think that is a really good call to action for folks who might be interested. We could have like 20 more hours of conversation, Aaron, but I want to go jump into a couple of specific topics, right? And I think as we were discussing how different industries use robotics, we've talked about how automotive are the group that is very much kind of leading the way, and there are other industries that some people might be familiar with who are kind of more nascent in the use of robotics. And I think a lot of that is size of organizations. But one of the interesting kind of applications that I think lots of us see robotics on are like warehouses and stores, and how lots of groups will use AMRs and other robotics to go put things away, to go pick orders. And some groups are using robotics kind of in customer facing areas. Can you tell us how you as Aaron, or maybe how the SDOs are kind of approaching kind of this new explosion of robotics and kind of where the responsibilities lie?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the biggest growth right now for robots is in logistics. Definitely saw that at FedEx. You're moving stuff from point A to point B, and that's best done by automation and robotics, not by people. And I think this is why Locus Robotics is probably one of the most successful robot firms out there. They are addressing of how do you get from point A to point B, and they got really good at it because that was a problem everyone wanted to solve. So it is interesting. And now OSHA is going into warehouses much more frequently to address safety concerns, issues, and all that. And they're seeing more and more robots. That's not going to change. It's not going to go away. But there is the blurring now of the lines. and we sort of talked about this in earlier, Dave, was about right before COVID. One of my committee weeks was we were during a break. We were just chatting away on some topics, and one of the large retailers at the standards meeting had just deployed one of those robots that go up and down the aisles scanning things. And I'm like, so we were just talking, how are you liking that robot? How well is it doing it? But I also threw a safety question at her, and I asked, so that scanning robot is going up and down every aisle. If it runs over one of your employees, what is that? Is that an OSHA injury? It was very interesting. The OSHA guy was just off to the other side, and he literally just chimed up and says, yep, that's an OSHA injury. That's OSHA. You would have to report that because that robot hit an employee. I'm like, interesting. So that's an OSHA injury. What happens if it keeps going up the aisle and then runs over grandma? What's that? And literally the OSHA guy was like, we out. No more. Nope. I'm not talking. So it is like, okay. We just, for this past hour, guys, we've just been talking about how important OSHA is. And here's OSHA saying, well, if your robot hits someone in the public, that's not us. Well, who is it? Guess what? We're not getting many answers on that front. So there is this question of, as robots enter the public realm, who are the regulatory agencies? Now, we're seeing how California is flexing its muscle around Cruise and the autonomous vehicles. And there is some regulatory frameworks out there. But on a grand scale, if you have a public-facing robot and it hurts somebody, it's probably going to be just a lawsuit. And that's going to be interesting going forward, because the lawyers are entering the standards world. I'm not outing anything here. Lawyers are participating in standards making for their companies. And there's a reason why, because exactly what we talked about. There is a law in the books here in the US that if a standard is what is generally accepted by that industry as what they want to be held accountable to, that applies to the lawyers as well. They can bring standards into a court of law and saying, why did you not follow this? So that's another area all us SDOs are going to start working on here very soon, if not already, of how do we address some of these concerns for the public with robots. This is why our legged robot, the first thing they went after is, how do we ensure this thing does not tip over and fall on somebody? Because that's the last thing you're going to want. That will make news really fast if a Digit or a Optimus or any one of these legged robots is out in the park and it falls on a kid. We will hear about that for weeks on end. So this is the new area that we're going into. So again, if this is an area that you're passionate about and you want to work on addressing robots in the public, us SDOs want to talk to you too. So.
And that's super interesting, right? Like, again, I think the three of us have a very manufacturing focused, I think, in general outlook, but we see more and more robots in even very basic applications, right? Bringing something at a restaurant from, the kitchen out to a table. And if that robot tips over because the customer, picked up a plate and barely knocked the robot on somebody else, then who is responsible, right? And as you said, maybe for now it's just a lawsuit, but at some point, and again, I don't think they have standards, but maybe there will be standards of, if you're in a restaurant, that's going to be, this many people served by the robot with this many items, then it has to follow like A, B, C, D, whatever standard. So I think it's a very important discussion. And to be honest with you, again, I think the industry is changing so quickly. I'm not even sure how regulatory bodies can keep up with this, but we'll see, I guess, what happens.
Yep. I mean, it's a great time, but it's also why I am always traveling and always busy trying to address this or that. And there's never a dull moment of what's the next thing to come across my desk of what's this robot doing? Where's it doing it? And Oh, that's why the regulatory guys are asking questions. That happens a lot.
Aaron, if somebody, I know there's going to be a question on who should reach out to you, but I guess like I want to make it more broad here of if you want to get involved, right? You've mentioned this a couple of times.
Mhm.
What are some of the ways that you can either join I'm assuming a standards committee, go to an event, maybe to speak to someone
Mhm.
before you make the commitment? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, at any time, if anyone wants to join F45, they definitely can just look us up on the ASTM website. Nora Nimmer is our staff manager. She everyone in. We have her contact information on the website. For other organizations, each one's a little bit different. A3 has their way of getting involved. If anything, I would say if you're sort of on the fence on some of this fall will be the International Robot Safety Conference that A3 puts on. I believe it'll be in Cincinnati this year. That's a great 3 day conference where you literally will get all the information about robot safety standards, how to get involved, and just get started that way. It's a great also conference if you're just a designer of robot systems, of what are the standards, what do I got to build to. So you don't even have to be involved in standards making, but if you need to know what standards are, that's a great conference to go to. You'll probably see a lot at Automate. A lot of the various companies have their safety stuff out. So you'll probably see a lot of those references. But it is, if you think you have an idea, reach out to us. Uh, I always welcome folks at new committees. People can participate and not be a member yet. They can listen in. That's another thing about standards organizations is we have to be transparent to the public. So I'll sometimes have newbies that just phone in for a online meeting to discuss one topic. And then from there, they realize if they really want to join. So that's another option. But just put yourself out there. I mean, Automate's going to be a great place to actually ask questions. I know the A3 safety team will be there. So just feel free to reach out to those guys.
Awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely. Aaron, this has been fantastic. I feel like we've got at least 12 more hours of conversation just surrounding the standards. And just based upon the fact that everyone is still with us, I think we found the 4 or 5 dozen folks on LinkedIn who are interested in listening to us talk about standards. Having said that, we do want to be respectful that there is a Standards Week happy hour and other things going on in other people's lives today. So we want to go ask you the questions that we ask all of our guests. And the first one is, as I tell everyone, one of my most favorite of asking you to predict the future. So I guess on your side, I'd like you to predict the future, maybe of standards, maybe of robotic standards, maybe of robotics in general. What are your thoughts on this?
I definitely think we're going to see more and more robots. I mean, the genie is out of the bag. We're going to see robots in new industries. We're going to see robots out in the public more. It's coming. So from a standards framework, I think we're going to have to get much more proactive. We're going to have to go much faster. The good thing is I know at ASTM we average 12 to 18 months to get a standard from pitch to publication. Is what we've been averaging. I hope I can speed that up a little bit more just to stay ahead of things. But also, I think we're going to start seeing a regulatory framework for some robots. Of you will have to show that your robot is in compliance with not only the safety standards that are out there, but potentially some other test performance standards. So, like if you want to deploy a humanoid robot out on the sidewalk doing something, not only are you going to have to show a regulatory agency, either locally or state level or federal level, of it passed this test, and then also show that it won't tip over or what its shutdown methodology is if something does happen. I think that is going to be some big things that regulatory agencies are going to ask. I think we're going to start seeing a framework closer to what we see around cars and other vehicles of you have to be in compliance with certain things. If there's a recall of your robot, what does that look like? as robots just become more of a consumer product at both the industrial and home levels, you're going to just see this happen. More regulatory agencies are going to come to the table. That's where it's going to get really interesting because, okay, OSHA has industry. Consumer Product Safety Commission has all the home robots. FDA has all the medical robots. And it's like, well, NASA has all the space robots. It's like, the list goes on and on. But I think you're going to start seeing these frameworks built out, not to stifle this, but to accelerate this. If everyone knows what the rules are on how to get your robot out there, I think it's going to speed up everything. But the flip side of that is we need students right now in school learning standards. They need to standards should be part of your curriculum at college at the 4-2-year level training. So you understand what you're going to be held accountable to when you enter the workforce. So that's another thing you'll see a lot of us standards organizations start pushing is education at the school level, so students know what the standards are when they're coming out.
Absolutely. I agree. And I think that in my experience, at least reading enough standards to understand what they actually mean, because as you mentioned earlier, Aaron, the real heroes of standards organizations are like English majors and people that maybe didn't start their lives in technical positions. And so folks going to tech school and even like a 4-year engineering school reading, "You shall do this," is not maybe what most folks would expect, and knowing that shall means you absolutely 100% will, and if you don't, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, because sometimes some of us might read that as, hey, there might be a little bit of flexibility in this, when there absolutely isn't flexibility in this. So I would absolutely agree, going and understanding how to read standards and what standards are and why they are valuable. I have seen lots of especially smaller groups, not necessarily in the robotic space, but say, hey, we could in theory develop to these standards, but we never really talk about these standards, or we talk about these standards by a specific standard number and don't really go any deeper in that and have never really read the standards beyond it. So I agree, knowing standards and the value and what they are and how to read them, exceptionally important. Kind of piggybacking off of this, we like to ask our guests for some career advice. So perhaps if there's someone early career, either in tech school or perhaps kind of early to mid career, looking to get into industry or get into robotics, what's the best career advice that you have for them, please?
I mean, don't limit yourself. As I said, you do not need to be an engineer from MIT to be successful in robotics. You can be from anywhere. And the industry is growing so fast. We need viewpoints and ideas from everybody out there. Okay. I don't care what your background is. You can contribute to robotics right now. Now, that being said, you got to put yourself out there. You got to get out there and start meeting folks and understanding all the different aspects of the industry so you can find where is your home within the industry, because you will find a home. Okay. It might be at a very technical level, and that's what you want to do. That's fine. If you want to be in an administration or writing standards part, that's fine too. But first thing you need to do is you need to get out there, go to these conferences and expos, start talking to folks, start learning our lingo. Okay. Because we do speak our own little lingo within the robotics industry. But as you do that, as you build your network, doors will start opening. Okay. But the whole thing is unless you get out there and start really talking to folks and just sharing a beer, sharing a coffee, whatever, it opens other doors. Okay. And one thing I pride myself on is I might not be able to get you an answer of where to go get your next career move. But if you tell me what you're looking for, I can at least point you in the direction of certain areas or certain people. And I will gladly do that every day out there. But unless you ask me that, I can't help you. Okay. So, and I will try, I get inundated with a lot of requests, and I try and get answers to folks as fast as possible. But the whole thing is I'm not the only one out there that will do that. Okay. So go out there, reach out to folks, engage, visit booths, visit conferences. I mean, between May and October, we have the calendars filled. Okay. But that's the biggest thing I just say is just get out there and ask questions.
Absolutely. I would agree that. And if I can add, maybe get to know the person or group but first before say, hey, this is exactly what I'm looking for, or do you have a job or do you have an internship? Being able to go make a bit of a connection, but before that being the first question or comment, that is always helpful to be able to get to know the person a little bit more. Aaron, I know you've got a couple of book recommendations for us. What are they, please?
Yeah, I'm going to recommend two books. First is Chip Wars. Came out early last year, but if you really want to understand the push to get semiconductors made here in the United States, why there's been huge investments, that book pretty much it's funny now. Is it's part policy, part current events of what that book has predicted is already starting to come true. So if you're in manufacturing, it is a great read. It just shows how important policy, national policy, international policy impacts manufacturing and what it all means when it all comes together. So it is a great read. If you don't want to read it, the audiobook is great. I've listened to the audiobook, I think twice already again. It is just a really good book. The other one is a academic book that was actually written about the same time as Chip Wars called Robots Will Not Save Japan. And it is it's somewhat dry in certain areas, but what is really amazing about that, it really looks at how Japan, being the first country that saw population decline, it is continuing to shrink. It has a fast growing aging population. Everyone's like, wow, we'll just have robots take care of the old folks. And we see all the great videos. We see the robots interacting with elderly folks, picking patients up, doing this. The issue is you pull the curtain back a little bit, and this book does a really good job at that. It shows how those robots don't always work. And if anything, they actually create more work for the nurses and caregivers than saving them time. So a lot of those robots are getting parked. And the media doesn't tell that story. They just talk about how great this is, but it's a great tale of we might have great ideas for technology and what they can do, but then when it hits the field, it don't work. And it's a great tale because Japan is still trying to figure out what the heck it's going to do with its aging population, and it is clear the robots are not helping matters, at least right now.
Absolutely.
So it's a good book of just we have all these great ideas of what we think robots are going to do for us, but the reality is something different on the ground.
Absolutely. I think that especially is interesting. I think it's as people go deploy any sort of technology, it's always you have to do significant amounts of prep work and put things in the way exactly that you want. And then if you are removing the kind of human aspect of it, it has to be basically 100% replicable every time over and over again. And I think that is the easy miss as we talk about some of how these technologies will go change a whole bunch of things is the process. Is the process of everything has to be 100% perfect. And with robots and with humans, at least, there are very few things that are 100% perfect. I have listened to Chip Wars at least once based upon some recommendations. I have not listened to Robots Won't Shave Japan, but just the title of it excites me. So thank you for that, Aaron. And then last question is how can our listeners help you? Who should reach out and connect? I know that you've talked about a bunch of these things, but we want to make sure to give you that opportunity to kind of surmise and put everything together.
Yeah, I mean, definitely you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Again, I get inundated with a lot of messages, so I try and get to them as fast as possible. But if you are interested in joining ASTM F45, that committee, I mean, they work on everything from navigation to object detection to legged robots to grasping manipulation, a lot of testing stuff. just look us up. I mean, if you Google ASTM F45, we pop right at the top. And then from there, you can contact Nora. Nora will definitely get you in the door. Even if you just want to try and just sit in on a meeting, go ahead. We're wide open to that. But also, if you think you want to work on safety, reach out to A3. Carol Franklin at A3 is great. She's always looking for volunteers to work on robot safety. So that's another great contact that's out there. Mm-hmm. But the biggest thing is we need more folks helping us write these. And if you have an expertise in a certain area, the more we want to probably talk to you, because that's how we advance the industry. And it is volunteer. I mean, mm-hmm. I did it for 27 years with FedEx, and I volunteered my time. Now I'm getting paid to do it. But oddly, I don't get the right standards anymore. I just have to help you write standards. So it's a weird trade-off. But the whole thing is I've seen how standards advance the industry. It does advance the industry. Mm-hmm. So we just need more folks helping us on that. So if you have a passion of advancing the industry and you want to work on standards, I want to talk to you.
Aaron, that is fantastic. Thank you so much for taking time out of Standards Week and all of the fun that you guys are having, writing the next generation of standards to come talk to us and all of the folks on Manufacturing Hub. If you guys missed the front and are still listening, here are all the things that you can do in like the near immediacy. Hanover Messe is in like a week and a half. I will be there. The Robotics Summit and Expo is May 1st and 2nd in Boston. Aaron will be there. And there'll be a bunch of awesome content coming out. I'm excited to see the content as neither Vlad nor I are planning to be there. All of us will be at A3's Automate in Chicago the 6th through the 9th. And then, Aaron, you're going to have to remind everyone of the South Korean show the following week if they want to circumnavigate with robotic shows.
Yeah, it's actually in Japan. It'll be ICRA in Yokohama the week right after Automate. So just bring your passport to Automate and jump on a plane.
Just keep going. No, that is amazing. If you guys have made it this far, make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure that you're connected with Aaron so that you can follow along. Make sure you're following Manufacturing Hub, Vlad, and myself. If you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening on the podcast, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, rate us 5 stars on the podcast. Do the share and everything else. When I remember to ask and we post podcasts, you guys listen to more of them. Amazing causation and correlation right there. Until next week, we'll see everyone soon.